You take the environment, it's the same thing. They're talking about cap and trade. Well, suppose you're a trucking company and you're considering expanding. Well, do you buy more trucks? Or are they going to be taxed tomorrow? How much are they going to be taxed? The uncertainty is so great that odds are you're sitting on the sidelines today and you're waiting. By the way, I love this quote talking about economics and liberty and all this from a British gentleman by the name of Lord Monckton. You can Google him or look him up on YouTube. He's a very entertaining speaker. I saw him at a conference at the American Legislative Exchange Council a while back. And I love this quote he made about the environmentalists. He says, "They follow what I like to call the traffic light strategy," he says. "They say they're green because they're too yellow to admit they're red." And that's the truth. The fact, I'm sure many of you know the facts of global warming, and whether it's man-caused or sun-caused or any number of things like that. I'm not going to go through all that. But the fact is they've made up their minds, right? Well, gee, why? Because it gives them an opportunity to manage everybody else's lives for the good of everybody else. They have the best of intentions, but they suffer from a fundamental hubris. And that is that they think they really do know everything. I mean, a complete lack of humility. And there's an excellent example from American history of people who thought they knew more than they did and where they learned humility. And it turns out it's the Pilgrims. Do y'all know that the Pilgrims were communists? Anybody here know that? Some of you do. Yeah, they were communists, at least early on. They came to America and they started farming communally. And everybody was supposed to have a job, and they were supposed to be assigned a job, and they were supposed to go out and do it. And the women were supposed to wash everybody's clothes, but not just for their own family, and do various kinds of work. And some of the cooking, I guess, even was done communally, but especially the farming was done communally. And they kept having new settlers coming over, and they kept living with famine, and this went on for about 3 years, I believe. And I have quotes from William Bradford, who was most of the time the governor of the colony. And he says, "So they began to consider how to raise more corn and obtain a better crop than they had done, so that they might not continue to endure the misery of want. At length, after much debate, the governor, who was Bradford, with the advice of the chief among them, allowed each man to plant corn for his own household. This was very successful," he said. "It made all hands very industrious, so that much more corn was planted than otherwise would have been by any means the governor or any other could devise, and saved him a great deal of trouble and far better satisfaction." Trouble, what trouble? Central planter trouble. Going out and saying, "Please work," trouble. He says, "The women now went willingly into the field and took their little ones with them to plant corn, while before they would allege weakness and inability, and to have compelled them would have been thought great tyranny and oppression." Well, William Bradford had a conscience. Now, when the gulags in Russia didn't want to do what the central planters told them to do, those central planters didn't have a conscience. They pulled out rifles and shot people in the head. But William Bradford did have a conscience, so he didn't beat people into submission. My concern is that we have essentially people who are willing to beat people into submission. That's my concern. And part of it is, this was a small community, whereas you're nameless faces to these bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. He points out the failure of the experiment of communal service, which was tried for several years, and by good and honest men proves the emptiness of the theory of Plato and other ancients, and you could substitute Marx there, that the taking away of private property and the possession of it by community, by a commonwealth, would make a state happy and flourishing. And I love this last little part. As if they were wiser than God. He says, "Let none argue that this is due to human failing, rather than to this common is failing in them, that God in his wisdom saw that another plan of life was fitter for them. What is that failing? What is this failing he says all men have? Self-interest. We're all self-interested. It doesn't matter if you're in the government. It doesn't matter if you're in a labor union. It doesn't matter if you're in a corporate board. It doesn't matter if you're the boss down at the corner gas station. It doesn't matter if you're an employee. It doesn't matter if you're a mother or a child. Everybody acts in his or her own self-interest. And the question is, are we going to organize ourselves in a way that we make the most of maybe the most powerful force in humankind, self-interest, through market forces, or are we going to distort them into something, frankly, evil through government forces? Because people in government act in their own self-interest. And I'll just end with a little example here. And I don't want to insult anybody, but think about the incentives here. It's not any one person or any particular school. I'm going to use education as an example that I'm picking on here. But just think about the principal in a public school setting. The principal in a public school setting. What incentive does he have to strive for excellence? A neat reputation? I have personally seen situations, mainly in Texas, where principals who did a great job and turned a school around and made it good found themselves under attack by their own colleagues. Why? Because they were showing up everybody else. So they would get called frauds or something like that. So what are the incentives these people have? They're not paid any differently depending on whether or not they're successful. That's because of by government design. The incentive that they have and that good men battle against, the incentive that they have is to get through their day with the most peace possible. And that means when a teacher sends an unruly kid to their office, they say, don't do that again, and send the kid back to the classroom to continue to be unruly. It means that they don't do things to challenge parents to parent better, or to discipline their child, because that would cause them trouble during the day. And we see how in the public education system, in many situations, except when there are people who battle that incentive, and that proves that there are good people out there that do this. And I don't know how they stand to do it on a daily basis. But they are battling an incentive. Whereas in a market system, you would have an incentive to have a good reputation in your school, to attract people who do discipline their kids and do want a good education for their kids, who can serve essentially as examples for the rest of the community. And there's a movement to the top instead of to the bottom. That's how self-interest can work for us and not against us. And that's the problem I have with the Obama administration.